Hearing is re-adjourned, so if I'm correct, our next questioner is Mr. Roy from Texas. Gentleman's recognized for such time as he may consume.
I thank the chairman. I thank the witnesses, our colleagues. It's hard to express and to put into words how bad things are in Texas at the moment, as my colleague, the chairman of Foreign Affairs, understands as well. And, you know, all of us with eyes who are looking at what's actually occurring in Texas as we speak. The number of videos I'm getting sent to me from people down on the ground, the number of texts from people in Border Patrol and in DPS explaining how egregious the situation is, it's pretty extraordinary. I got a text just a little bit ago, says, quote, "Be advised of the language." These messages from local law enforcement. Quote, "As of last night, the radios went crazy for West and South Laredo. Waves of illegals, literally just group after group, bum rushing the border. The agents were spread thin as hell. Constables, Precinct 2, Webb County attorneys, and our only game warden are working with their asses off in Rio Bravo, El Cenizo, and South Laredo. Webb County has a stand-down order to not pursue, either on foot or in vehicle. Now you've got down here in my PCD, we're literally all doubled up because our units are breaking down every other day. Ranchers are calling every other hour, stating there are folks on their property, but we can't get there fast enough. I hate to say this, but we're getting our asses handed to us. I used to have patterns, trends, and knew the drop-off pickup areas, but now it's effing free-for-all. Approximately 600 bodies at the Lavarius Gate, just half a mile east from Yarborough, happening right now in El Paso. Another guy, we are almost at Broken Arrow. We are holding over 27,000 in custody. Of that 27,000, a little over 5,000 are processed, waiting for their next phase in the process. Every sector is near 150% capacity. I keep getting, reached out from sheriffs, from people working in law enforcement, DPS. I just got this video where there's just streams of people streaming across the Rio Grande as we speak right now. That's from 5 minutes ago. This is what it's like in our states, in our communities, in the places that we represent. And the consequences here are pretty significant. And unfortunately, while my colleagues like to dismiss this as being somehow calloused and cold-hearted to people seeking asylum, the fact of the matter is the vast majority of the individuals coming are not fleeing from a legitimate fear of persecution, a credible fear of persecution of their political beliefs or religious beliefs, as the data bears out, but rather seeking a better way of life, which no one begrudges. Not one person begrudges the people that are fleeing to come here to find a better way of life. But what you have here is a system being perpetrated by an administration that doesn't care about the rule of law, that is the beacon of hope for the people around the world to come to a place that respects the rule of law, but rather is allowing cartels to profit, moving these individuals, is allowing this process to continue in which people end up getting harmed and hurt. The 856 migrants along the South Texas lands along the Rio Grande or along southern Arizona that died last year, bodies found on ranches, 80-year-old, 75-year-old, 70-year-old ranchers finding dead bodies of young women, migrants along their ranches. We just blithely just ignore that. We just act like that's nothing. We act like that's somehow the humanitarian and, quote, Christian thing to do, to say that it's compassionate to allow our wide open borders to continue. The folks have repeatedly heard the story, the horrific story of the 53 migrants who basically cooked in a tractor trailer in San Antonio last summer in Texas. Just horrific what law enforcement had to find. You say, oh, well, that's a problem because we don't have open enough borders. We don't have enough going on to process folks. The fact of the matter is, if we were actually enforcing our laws in the way that they are designed to ensure that people who have a legitimate asylum claim can have their claim heard and processed, but we are not opening our door to every single individual that would come to the river or come to the border, then we would have not chaos, but we would actually have operational control of the border. To watch Secretary Mayorkas, as my friend from Tennessee questioned, come and sit in front of the committee and say, and smirk to me, saying we have operational control of the border. saying that when he's staring at the statute that says that you must have operational control of the border, and look at me and say, we have operational control of the border, which is what he did a year ago. Meanwhile, just ignore when I showed him the faces of fentanyl, the dead Americans, the young Americans dead from fentanyl, page after page after page of thousands of American young, the number one killer of our young between 18 years of age and 45 years of age. I met with 3 fentanyl moms last Thursday morning at a restaurant in Austin. Talked to them. And one of their sons, never done drugs to the best of her knowledge. It took a Valium. It was laced with fentanyl. Gone. 8 kids in the school district in which I live, in Hayes ISD in Texas, dead since last August from fentanyl poisonings. Over a dozen or more that have been saved from Narcan but through the use of Narcan. This is the state of things in Texas. And we're causing it. We're driving it. People talk about the root cause of this. We're the root cause of it. We're the ones putting a big neon sign on the Rio Grande that says, come on up, pay your thousands of dollars to the cartels, come on up, get abused, send your children right on the top of train cars, send your children into the hands of the cartels, allow them to get sold into the sex trafficking trade, allow them to get put in stash houses in Houston, Texas, in San Antonio, Texas, in Laredo, Texas, McAllen, Texas, to get raped, abused, tortured, spend thousands of dollars. We allow that to continue. Get sold into the slave labor trade throughout the country. And then we have this defense on the 85,000 children that were, oh, we can't find them. But, oh, no, that's not true. They were found, but it was just we didn't contact them on first try. But then you go look into it a little further. It's like, well, they did find some later, but they still haven't contacted all of them. Not one of us would treat our own child that way. Not one. Like, oh, I wonder where that child is. I tried to call, didn't get a hold of him. Well, gosh, I hope they're with the parent or the uncle or oh, is it the uncle? Is it the real uncle? Is it not the uncle? But we don't care about all that because it is far easier to say we're compassionate. Oh, look at us. We're Christian and compassionate with open borders. And it's ridiculous. The rhetoric surrounding this bill which attempts to do nothing more than solidify our existing laws put in place predominantly, if not entirely, on a bipartisan basis, yet being routinely ignored by this administration, routinely flouted and abused by this administration. I've heard discussion of parole, the use of parole. I wonder if my friend from California, Mr. McClintock, could talk just a little bit about the extent to which parole is supposed to be on a case-by-case basis and not categorically used in direct violation of our laws, regardless of whether it is for a good purpose or not. Would the gentleman agree that that is not what parole laws are supposed to be for?
Parole is an individual exception from the enforcement of a law. A categorical parole is amending that law. Under our Constitution, the law does not live in the president's mouth. It must be changed by the representatives of the people through the constitutional process. This president has taken upon himself to change the laws at whim by declaring a categorical parole. There is no such thing.
Does the gentleman from California agree with me that the intent behind the legislation that came through the judiciary portion of this bill and the letter of what came through the Judiciary Committee is designed to ensure that our current laws are enforced and that we are making sure that we are fixing some of the problems in our current interpretation and application of the law to protect individuals, to protect children from abuses in terms of unaccompanied children currently being abused because of the TVPRA application with respect to unaccompanied children, because we've got a situation with respect to the Flores court opinion that has then been turned into policy that has caused essentially a separation problem or a sort of catch-22 on how we deal with families. Would the gentleman agree that the purpose behind that is to actually protect individuals so that we can enforce the law properly with the maximum amount of care for the individuals in question?
Well, yes. Again, this is not fair to legitimate asylum claims who have to wait years and years and years to have their cases heard because the courts have been glutted with millions of fraudulent claims. We do no service to our entire our entire nation is built upon the concept of legal immigration. The fact that when people come to our country, they come with a sincere desire to become Americans, to raise their children as Americans, to acquire a common language, a common culture. They obey all of our laws. They wait patiently in line. They do everything our country asks of them to do, while millions now of illegal aliens are cutting in line in front of them. This bill is designed to restore the legal immigration process, to assure the rights of every person coming to this country, and to assure the rights of the people of the United States to have a country.
The gentleman from California agreed with me that by doing what we are doing in this legislation, we would in fact curb releases into the United States, which is the main magnet and draw for the
Well, that's
flood
the whole
currently
reason.
occurring.
The whole reason to make a fraudulent asylum claim is you get automatic entry into the country. You get lots of free stuff. You get a ticket anywhere you want to go in the country. You get indefinite residency permission, indefinite work authorization. And you know that years down the line, when your case is finally heard and is rejected, you're not going to be deported. So there's every incentive to make a fraudulent claim. This bill removes those incentives and will make it much harder for this or any future president to abuse the laws as they have.
And is the purpose not also to make sure that families stay together and are united through the duration of the processing of their asylum claim rather than separated?
Yes, exactly right. This fixes the Flores decision, and it requires people coming together as families to remain together as families. And if they want to file an asylum claim, then the question is detain, as the current law requires, or return to Mexico or a safe third country to await adjudication of their claim together.
It is similarly protect unaccompanied children with respect to the current policy that resulted from the application of TVPRA and so forth, so that it is now ensuring that they get sent home safely rather than drawing a magnet for children to be put on the top of train cars or sent solo, which, by the way, is the ultimate family division, i.e. child separation policy.
As I said earlier, the Border Patrol agents are unanimous in this opinion that if you want to stop the trafficking of children, you need to send them safely home. That will dry up the cartel's business and will end this ongoing tragedy.
I heard earlier from earlier testimony that, quote, Title 42 is cruel and restrictive policy. I think it was a gentleman from Texas, my colleague from San Antonio, that Title 42 is, quote, cruel and restrictive policy. First of all, is the gentleman aware that Title 42 is set to expire the day after tomorrow?
Yes, thanks to this administration.
And when Title 42 expires, does the gentleman agree that essentially a third to half of the flood that has been coming across the border to date has been dealt with or turned away through Title 42?
Yeah, I have no way to forecast the future, but it is quite clear that what is unfolding this week with the collapse of Title 42 is the collapse of what has remained of our southern border, and I think we're going to see that in very graphic terms.
Would it surprise the gentleman that that the gentleman from San Antonio and another colleague from Texas, Mr. Kassar, requested $38 million in FEMA emergency relief for San Antonio in preparation for the expiration of Title 42?
Well, again, we're watching the collapse of our social safety net that was designed to help Americans in need, and that's not just at the border, that's everywhere now.
A question for the gentleman, my colleague from Texas. Could you explain just a little bit with respect to the authorities that be put forth with the State Department to negotiate asylum agreements and the purpose of that?
Yeah, basically the provision reinstates and codifies into law the migrant protection protocols, otherwise known as Remain in Mexico, and the asylum ACAs, the agreements that, Mr. Roy, you know very well, was working. And on day one, President Biden rescinded these policies, and every Border Patrol agent I talk to, they tell me about the direct cause and effect between that rescission and what we're seeing on the border today. And there's no question that The political asylum is the magnet, it's the draw. The cartels know our laws, and when they saw this change, it didn't take them very long to exploit it for millions of dollars and exploiting the children all along the way.
Now, as a former federal prosecutor, a former head of criminal division at the Office of the Attorney General in Texas, as the former head of the Homeland Security Committee, as the current head of the Foreign Affairs Committee, do these numbers sound correct to you? And if you have anything to add, please do. That kidnappings, that as many as 20,000 migrants en route to the southern border are kidnapped each year. Criminals and gangs profiting off these migrants by demanding ransoms for their return. Does that sound correct to you?
It sounds correct, but you don't know what you don't know. It could be a lot more.
Abuse of women and girls, that between 60 and 80%, according to certain sources that document this thing, the humanitarian organizations of Central American women and girls traveling to the U.S. and Mexico border are sexually assaulted on their way to the United States. I've heard numbers that run the gamut, but would you agree that, not knowing exactly what the percentage is, a non-insignificant number of these girls are abused on their journey, just the journey part? Let's forget what happens when they get to the United States, but the journey part of getting to the United States. Does the gentleman agree?
No, I completely agree.
Does the gentleman agree that cartels profit to an extraordinary amount, that at least one conservative estimate said they gain over $14 million daily from the illicit enterprises related to human smuggling and moving human beings for profit across our southern border?
That's correct.
Would it surprise the gentleman that in Kinney County, Texas, on Friday, Kinney County deputies found dozens of dehydrated migrants in an overheated train car in 100-degree weather?
Unfortunately, that happens way too often. As you cited, the San Antonio case, 40 people in a tractor trailer, 18-wheeler, smothered to death.
Would the gentleman agree that DHS has arrested more than 4,000 people for crimes related to the exploitation of children in fiscal year 2022, which was an 18% jump from FY 2021, and that they report that the policies at the border have had a significant impact on that?
No, that is correct.
Or that an estimated 60% of Latin American children who are set to cross the border alone or with human smugglers have been caught by the cartels and are being abused in child pornography or for drug trafficking?
That is correct.
Or that between fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2022, there was 400% jump in unaccompanied alien children encounters, again, between FY 2020, the first year, or the year just prior to the Biden administration, when President Trump was in power, and then FY 22, the full fiscal year under Biden, there was a 400% jump in unaccompanied alien children encounters. Can the gentleman, does he agree with that?
I do, and it's all a product of the rescission of the Remain in Mexico policy.
I wonder, that some of those touch on Homeland Security jurisdiction. I wonder if my friend from Tennessee has anything to add about those numbers and what he understands about the state of affairs along the border and what it means for migrants being abused, being profited from by cartels, little girls getting sold in the sex trafficking trade, people getting put into the slave labor trade, and how in any way, any human being, in Congress or out, could describe that as compassionate.
So the numbers that I've heard on the cartel profiting, $15 billion from the human trafficking, and it's anywhere from 13 to 16 billion on the drugs. So we're essentially, with this open door policy, this strategy that actually Merrick Garland was very honest and admitted was the cartel strategy in response to the open border, is profiting some of the most horrible, evil people in the world to the tune of, 30 to 35 billion dollars a year. And that's why we're seeing, interestingly enough, encrypted radios for the scouts that they're using to send the coyotes to the Customs and Border Patrol agents and then routing the drug cartel folks around the other side of the hill. They've got military-grade binos. They've got military-grade encrypted radios because they're making so much money. In terms of the testimony I've already given in reference to the children, whatever number it is, it's not insignificant. The study I like to quote is Doctors Without Borders. Maybe it's because I happen to be a doctor, but I also know that they're a pretty liberal organization. And so it's not like it's some, you can't accuse them of being on our side on this issue. And the statistics, they say it's 35% roughly women and children who are raped, making the trek across, from South America to the United States. What is shocking to me is that Secretary Mayorkas chose not to do background checks on sponsors for these unaccompanied children. I mean, that is just unconscionable. It is unacceptable. It is horrific. And it should, I got lots of reasons to be frustrated with Secretary Mayorkas, but that one is way up there. And then you see the articles in the New York Times again, and I prefer to quote them on this issue because, again, they're not supportive of my cause or my purpose here. But they're clearly pointing out where these children are being used as slaves. I mean, they're being used as slaves. It's horrific, and it's happening in America. Some of the stories we heard, just to give you an anecdote, oftentimes when the coyote takes the person into the United States and puts them in a stash house, they think they're done. But that's when they get the final bill. Oh, by the way, that's not all you owe. You're now going to take these drugs to Jacksonville or somewhere else. And it becomes a criminal network inside the United States because these individuals were brought here. And these are oftentimes susceptible people, and they take their children from them. We heard an anecdotal story where their child was withheld, and the mother was told to go and execute several crimes on behalf of the cartels inside the United States. And this is just the surrendering of our border, whether well-intentioned or not, has resulted in what Merrick Garland has described as the strategy of the cartels, and they are using it to harm Americans and harm migrants. And it is a tragedy that has been perpetrated by those policies that were removed. And it is, again, it's unconscionable.
I don't know if the gentleman from California, there were some statements made by the ranking member of this committee a little bit earlier saying that this legislation would, quote, demonize asylum seekers looking to enter a country legally. That they're all leaving and traveling thousands of miles because of fear of persecution. They're looking to legally claim asylum. And then quoted Matthew 25:35 in response to H.R. 2 discouraging NGOs from helping those migrants. Does the gentleman from California agree that H.R. 2 does nothing of the sort, but that rather it does prevent providing the transportation, lodging, or legal service that serve as the magnet to make the dangerous journey north?
Yes.
In other words, participating in the human smuggling operation.
Yes, it restores the conventional concept of asylum. It prevents the abuse of asylum claims. It assures that system is there for those who have legitimate claims to asylum in this country. And most of all, it restores the integrity of our borders that have been destroyed by this administration.
The ranking member also alleged that it strips protections from unaccompanied minors at the border, that will allow kids to be detained for a month or more, limited their access to counsel, and sending them back to smugglers. Does the gentleman agree that this bill simply treats children from Central America the same as we currently treat children from Mexico if they are not victims of trafficking?
That's
in other words,
exactly
we would
right.
protect kids that are victims of trafficking. When we have the flood of children, otherwise, we would then compassionately detain them and work to return them to their families.
That's exactly
in order to
right.
prevent the magnet.
And it is a moral imperative. If a little waif shows up on your doorstep, you're not going to take them 5 doors down to the sweatshop. You're going to get them safely home. Our government is currently taking them 5 doors down to the sweatshop. We need to get them safely home, as we already do for those who arrive from Mexico or Canada.
The ranking member also alleged that this bill does, quote, nothing to prevent drugs from entering this country, quoting the favorite statistic of some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that, quote, 90% of drug seizures occur at points of entry.
Well, ports of entry, everything that goes through there is inspected. Across our wide open border, nothing gets inspected unless we're able to intercept one of the 1.5 million known gotaways, which is problematic. We don't know how much is coming in through between the ports of entry because we can't inspect anything that's coming through those ports. So this is an utterly specious argument.
The gentleman has no doubt visited numerous times border points of entry.
Yes.
So at those ports of entry, as a gentleman, would he agree that at the vast majority of our ports of entry, I can't speak to every single one of them because I haven't visited all of them, we're not scanning every vehicle, right?
Correct.
We're not able to scan every truck and every vehicle in terms of the technology we have and so forth. So we're using a combination of human factors, dogs, expertise. We do some scans, periodic scans. So are we catching all of the drug seizures in the first place at the ports of entry? Question one. Question two, to the gentleman's point between the ports of entry. Currently, do we have any reasonable Border Patrol activity going on between the ports of entry at the level necessary to actually patrol it?
No, our Border Patrol officers complain bitterly about the fact that they're now spending all their time processing illegal aliens into the United States or doing paperwork. They can't do their jobs. But the point is this. No, they also tell me, no, we're not stopping all of the drugs at the ports of entry, but we're able to inspect what comes through and are able to stop some of it. But among those 1.5 million known gotaways, we know nothing. We can't inspect a single one of those because they got away. How much is coming through? Well, we know this. We're seeing an unprecedented epidemic across the country of fentanyl deaths. Averaging 300 a day. That's the equivalent of 2 737s crashing every single day. If that were happening in this country, don't you think there would be some alarm? And yet that's the equivalent of what's happening with the fentanyl crisis.
To my friend, going back to my friend from Texas, Mr. McCall, I assume he is aware, in fact, I know he is aware, I don't need to assume it, that our home state of Texas is, with all due respect to our colleagues from Arizona and California, that currently Texas is bearing the brunt of this crisis. For example, the fentanyl deaths, that in 2022, more than 2,000 Texans died from fentanyl poisoning, a 500% increase from 2019. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I know everybody likes to say every state's impacted, and they are. But I would argue that our state of Texas is bearing the burden of this chaos and the cost. Our legislature appropriated $4.5 billion this session to deal with this problem.
On top of what, $3 or $4 billion the last session, right?
Precisely.
I mean, we are in the double digits, high billions of dollars that Texas is appropriating to deal with a border crisis that is fundamentally and constitutionally supposed to be managed by the federal government.
A federal responsibility, correct.
And that therefore Texas should likely be paid back for said expenses, and we'll address that at another time. But another question, is the gentleman aware that 33 counties in Texas have declared an invasion?
Yes, sir.
That Midland Memorial Hospital has had to provide more than $200,000 in medical care to migrant children housed in its facility. Just straight up.
That's just one hospital.
One hospital in Midland County, not even one of the, like, right on the border counties, like way up in Midland.
Right.
That Dimmitt County has seen a 332% increase in high-speed chases related to human smugglers. That we get phone calls every day from sheriffs across Texas. You've got bailouts. You've got ranchers' fences getting cut. You've got livestock getting out. And I'm just curious what my colleagues around the country think about that. They don't seem to give a damn. Does my gentleman agree? I mean, my friend from Texas agree?
And how would you like to wake up and see dead bodies on your property? It happens all the time with ranches in our state.
Little girl and her grandmother died, and a human smuggler was transporting 11 illegal aliens in Arizona, Texas. And there was a chase with law enforcement, and they crashed into another vehicle, killing the occupants, which was a 7-year-old girl and her grandmother, who was 71. Does this kind of thing happen with regularity in Texas?
It happens all the time.
I would note that I've gotten to know the Vargas family in San Antonio. Jared Vargas was a college student in my district in San Antonio, 20 years old, was killed by someone here illegally, who had been deported, had been arrested, and killed him, set his body on fire. And his wonderful family, they've become friends of mine. Is this something that is all too unusual for our constituents in Texas, with the gentleman from Texas?
Well, it's a behavior of the drug cartels. They're extremely violent. I mean, they act like terrorists. They're actually probably a terrorist organization. They make a hell of a lot of money off these children that they enslave, and then the criminal enterprises in the United States that Chairman Green talked about.
I would ask my friend, Chairman Green, my friend from Tennessee, Title 42 has not yet been lifted, right? It will expire on Thursday, correct? That is correct. And yet the border is nevertheless being overrun as we speak. Every news story, every news channel that's covering this in terms of a flood of human beings coming across the border. Last week, DHS ordered hundreds of its employees to drop their regular duties to deploy to the southwest border for 60 days to assist with the anticipated surge. Does the Chairman of Homeland Security agree with that and aware of that?
Yes, I am, and I agree.
An estimated 600 to 700 U.S. CIS officials will be deployed to the border on top of the countless TSA, ICE, military service members, and Border Patrol agents pulled from other sectors. This on top of a significant number of the DPS authorities in Texas who have been deployed to the southern border at expense to Texans. Does the gentleman from Tennessee agree with that?
Yes, that is factually correct.
That one USCIS employee expressed their opposition to the new directive, saying, quote, "I strongly believe that credible fear applicants are being trafficked into the United States to work off their debt to their smugglers. Some of them are being trafficked as sex slaves," the employee said. "There's a reason why I left Asylum, and that is one of the reasons. That is, I don't want to work as a middleman for drug cartels and sex traffickers." Is the gentleman aware of those kinds of sentiments by people who have had to work in the Department of Homeland Security under an administration completely either feckless or more likely completely purposely allowing our border to get overrun while those who are supposed to be charged with securing the border have to deal with those kinds of situations?
I have had many of the DHS employees tell me just exactly the same.
Does the gentleman agree that the border is, as I described earlier from the quotes from people on the border, on the brink, that more than 54,000 apprehensions, nearly 19,000 gotaways, 138 pounds of fentanyl, 7 gang members and 6 sex offenders and 16 firearms in just 1 week, and 2 agents assaulted? Gentlemen agree with those kinds of stats, not specifically, but in general, that those are the kinds of things?
Absolutely, and we can see large caravans forming in the Darien Gap and throughout Central America. I was on the phone with the president of Guatemala yesterday, who was telling me that they're coming through his country now, and they're doing devastation in his country, harming his country. So, yeah, I mean, it's happening, and it's getting and going to get much worse.
Back to my friend from Texas, is the gentleman aware that Texas cities are right now bracing for the worst? El Paso, for example, has declared a state of emergency last week, the second time it has done so due to the crisis. That the city's downtown migrant center has been overwhelmed with migrants, leading to many of them setting up tents and panhandling in El Paso. That up to 12,000 migrants are waiting in Juarez, waiting to enter El Paso once Title 42 is gone.
Which will be Thursday, the day we pass this bill, and it's going to get a lot worse. And that's because we don't have operational control of the border, rather the cartels do.
The gentleman also aware that Laredo is facing similar situations, announcing a state of emergency over the weekend over incoming migrant surge that is expected once Title 42 is scrapped.
Yes.
That Brownsville issued a state of emergency as 15,000 Venezuelan migrants crossed into the border city in a single week.
Yes.
Just this week, a report noted San Antonio's migrant center is expected to see a surge of migrants once Title 42 is lifted, when it's already currently at maximum capacity. Despite the health code still in place, the San Antonio Migrant Resource Center does not have enough food and water to provide to migrants, leading to some panhandling on the street and folks coming out of the center. Thousands of more migrants are expected to pass through San Antonio on May 11th. When asked about the end of the Title 42 and what it means for the San Antonio's Migrant Center, Antonio Fernandez, Executive Director of Catholic Charities, said, "I think it's going to be a disaster." Does that comport with my friend from Texas about what's happening to not just the state of Texas, but the migrants in the false name of compassion by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle?
There will be a wave of migrants once Title 42 is rescinded, just like when Remain in Mexico was. And our state cannot absorb this anymore. And that's why Mr. Cuellar supports, the provisions in my bill. It's actually why one of the on the Democrat side actually voted to make Remain in Mexico, to authorize it, and to codify it.
Is my friend from Tennessee aware that morale at DHS is extraordinarily low, that many are expected to leave, that Border Patrol is having trouble recruiting, that there have been suicide problems, that they were already stressed more during COVID, now stressed with the massive surge, that that an IG reported found 24% of CBP respondents said they plan to leave their jobs next year due to the added responsibilities of securing the border, that suicides, 14 Border Patrol agents committed suicide in 2022, the highest figure recorded in 13 years. Does the gentleman who's chairman of Homeland Security agree with that or are aware of that?
Actually, the number of suicides is higher than that now. And if you want to put it into comparison, they have a force of about 17,000 with 17 suicides in the last 12 months. And you can compare that to the New York Police Department, 35,000, 3 suicides.
So I could go on this issue because people know about it and know how I feel about it. I mean, the fact of the matter is this legislation, and I'll just close with my friend from California as I started, this legislation is designed very specifically to ensure that existing law is enforced for both the betterment of Americans to protect them as a sovereign nation, but also for the migrants who are currently being abused through a system that is allowing cartels to profit off of moving those human beings across the border through dangerous territory, allowing both Americans to die and migrants to die. That they are specifically put together as a package to ensure the safety of individuals, allow asylum claims to proceed, but to ensure that we minimize the flow, by virtue of focusing on people who have legitimate, credible fear, claims to asylum, and a process by which they can do that, but by minimizing that flood through enforcement of the law as it is supposed to be carried out and has been on a bipartisan basis historically, but is being blatantly ignored by this administration. If the gentleman would like to.
Yes, and I think it restores the concept of legal immigration upon which this country was founded. If we're going to tolerate illegal immigration, there's no point to legal immigration, and our nation of immigrants loses its foundation, and that's at stake in this discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just close with this. Our state is under siege. It just is. People are hurting. People are dying. Migrants are dying. Ranchers are getting overrun. Schools, children. It's extraordinary that we can't come to some rational understanding and agreement that we have a duty as a country, as a free country, a powerful country, to establish a just system under the rule of law, and that is better for us, the world, and migrants who seek to come here. It's extraordinary that we can't do that as a country. We used to do that. We used to be able to sit down and agree to basic truths, basic fundamental truths, that it is better for the world when we enforce the rule of law, and it is better for human beings when we do it in a compassionate way, but still according to the rule of law. I hope that some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle will take a step back and look at what's happening and ask themselves if this is the way that we should do things. And it's just clearly not. It's clearly wrong. I cannot possibly put into words what we see in Texas every single day and what pain is being caused for human beings as a result of an administration that is putting politics and crass political fortune in front of our duty to actually do our job as citizens in this country to secure the border. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman.